Do not know me, my name is Giulia Maria Ferraresi. I'm project analyst at the Social and Civil Affairs Division of the Union for Mediterranean. And I'm very honored to welcome you today to this UfM webinar on the occasion of the International Women's Day. We will be tackling with an outstanding group of speakers from different and diverse backgrounds, the nexus on gender equality, climate change, and security. But before delving into today's topics, just allow me to give some technical details. Today's meeting will be recorded for reporting purposes only. You will receive a report summarizing all the key message from today's webinar afterwards. There will be simultaneous interpretation in Arabic, French, and English throughout all the 2 hours webinar. You can change the language setting at the bottom of your screen where there is the globe. And I really thank the interpreters for being here today for this webinar. And last but not less important, you have a chat that is available for everyone, should be available soon, where you can write your questions because there will be a roundtable with panelists afterwards. But you can also share your good practices and initiatives on the nexus of gender equality, climate change, and security that will then include in the report that will be shared with you afterwards. So now let's start by thanking you all for being here today with us for this important topic on this important occasion. Let's thank all the panelists and speakers that will share with us their insights later on today. And our partner, the European Institute of the Mediterranean, UfM-IEMed, for making this webinar possible and for making the cooperation of the UfM and UfM-IEMed on the Mediterranean Women Empowerment Policy Paper possible as well. The second edition of this policy paper collaboration will be officially launched today by the UfM-IEMed representative who is today with us. But why are we gathered to tackle these issues? As you know, the Union for Mediterranean is an intergovernmental organization gathering 43 member states from the Euro-Mediterranean region, who has a convening power to bring together different actors and stakeholders in order to move the agenda forward for meaningful change. This webinar, today's discussion, goes in line with that, as we know that the Euro-Mediterranean region is an hotspot for climate change due to rise temperature, extreme weather events, and prolonged droughts. In this context of climate change, where above all in the context of also rising conflicts, these issues exacerbate existing discrimination and disparities in vulnerable communities, and often women are part of these vulnerable communities as we are affected negatively by systemic discrimination and inequality which are embedded in our society. Moreover, the fact that climate change can increase displacement of people and also the fight again over the scarce resources, this can lead to, unfortunately, an increase of violence and conflict. So in this very complex context, women face the burden of it because they are negatively affected by all these challenges. But the idea of considering women just as poor and mere victims of this is not correct and is not realistic, because we know that women have really a unique perspective, and we can have an active role as agent of change in this complex context. For example, if we think about rural communities, women are the one usually managing resources in the family environment, such as water or other natural resources. And when it comes to peace building processes, it is recognized that the peace agreement can last longer and are more sustainable where women are part of the decision-making positions in the peace building processes, which doesn't happen that often. But that's statistically, there are data that prove this, because the International Peace Institute find out that when women participate in a leadership position in peace building processes, the peace agreement increase its probability of lasting 2 years by 20% and increase its probability of lasting 15 years by 35%. So today's discussions are really about focusing on how we can better integrate gender into climate adaptation, climate policies, peace building processes, and how to raise women's voices in leadership position within this context in the Euro-Mediterranean region. So now, after this brief overview of today's topic, I will stop here because I'm very glad to give the floor for his opening remarks to Ambassador Stephen Borg. He is Deputy Secretary General at the Social and Civil Affairs Division of the Union for the Mediterranean. And I'm very glad to give him the floor to set the scene for today's webinar. Thanks, Ambassador. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Julia, very much. Dear participants, distinguished speakers, panelists, good morning to everybody, and it is my pleasure to welcome you today to this webinar on the occasion of International Women's Day. This year we have chosen to mark International Women's Day by focusing on an increasingly salient subject for our Euro-Mediterranean region. And it is a subject that dwells on the intersection of gender, climate change, and security. But first of all, allow me to give a special word of thanks to our distinguished speakers who will share their valuable insights in today's roundtable later on. And a big thanks goes to the European Institute of the Mediterranean, UfM-IEMed, our long-standing partner, firstly for making this webinar possible, and secondly for their cooperation on the launching of the second edition of the UfM-IEMed MedWE Policy Paper on Climate Crisis and Gender Equality, Emerging Security Risks in the Euro-Mediterranean region, which will be launched later today. This year's theme could not be more timely, as it seeks to address the growing challenges faced by women in the context of climate change and security. The Euro-Mediterranean region is increasingly recognized as a hotspot for climate-induced risks, with rising temperatures considerably exceeding global average rates, severe droughts, and extreme weather events. And as we know, climate and environmental impacts are strongly interlinked with water, energy, and food insecurity in a nexus that needs to be addressed in a comprehensive and integrated approach. In this context, it is critical to recognize that women, particularly those in conflict-affected areas and in rural areas, bear the heaviest brunt of these impacts. They are often excluded from decision-making processes, faced barriers to land ownership, and struggled to access essential resources. Moreover, in conflict-prone regions where tensions over essential resources are intensifying due to the climate crisis, women are especially vulnerable. Climate-induced displacements have emerged as significant drivers of instability, with women facing heightened risks of gender-based violence, exploitation, and trauma. These complexities, which threaten both human security and sustainable peace, must be addressed in a comprehensive and inclusive manner through gender-sensitive policies. This scenario is further compounded by challenges of a social and economic nature. One stark reality is that women-led businesses account for less than 5% of the total in our region. An alarming economic gap and a lost opportunity for sustainable growth and development. However, it must also be said, and it must also be stressed, that the challenges women face are also opportunities to empower them as agents of change. Women across the region have demonstrated extraordinary leadership in climate adaptation, disaster risk reduction, and peace-building initiatives. Women are leading the way in promoting sustainable practices, managing resources, and rebuilding communities in the wake of crisis. This underlines the critical role women play, not just as victims, but as resilient and transformative leaders. Since 2015, the Union for the Mediterranean has been a key facilitator of regional dialogue, championing gender equality across the Euro-Mediterranean region. This effort acknowledges the essential role of women in driving sustainable development and in shaping our policies towards achieving these goals. The fifth Union for the Mediterranean Declaration on strengthening the role of women in society, agreed in 2022, reaffirms our commitment to strengthening legal frameworks, amplifying women's voices in decision-making processes, increasing investments in gender equality, and embedding gender consideration into environmental policies. The UfM has taken forward this work through stakeholders' dialogue, boosting societal awareness, and initiatives focused on reskilling and upskilling women's competencies. A key example of this was the capacity building on gender equality and climate change, which took place on the 11th of December in Athens last year, and which trained 40 women entrepreneurs from the MENA region. Building on this momentum, we are eagerly anticipating the establishment of the Community of Practice on Gender Equality and Climate Change, which will further strengthen these essential initiatives. Furthermore, with the support of the Swedish International Development Agency, SIDA, the UfM is developing a program focused on women, peace and security in contribution to the Women, Peace and Security agenda. As part of this, a specific capacity building event will be held in Amman in November this year, back to back with the UfM regional platform on women empowerment. Today, we are gathered not just to acknowledge the challenges that women face, but to push for concrete action. This webinar provides a platform to discuss policy gaps, exchange successful practices on women's leadership and participation, and highlight the need to integrate gender-sensitive approaches into climate and security governance frameworks. Through this collaborative dialogue, we aim to elevate the voices of women in decision-making processes relating to climate governance and security, ensuring their roles are not only recognized, but also amplified. I look forward to today's discussions and to launching the MedWE Policy Paper, which I am confident will contribute to advancing our shared goals of gender equality, climate justice, and sustainable peace at a time when this endeavor is required more than ever in our region. Thank you once again for your participation, and let us continue to work together towards a more inclusive and resilient future. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador Borg, for setting the scene for today's webinar and for highlighting as well the UfM upcoming initiative in which we want you to be on board, such as the Community of Practice on Gender Equality and Climate Change soon to be established, and this new Women, Peace and Security Capacity Building, which will be launching in November in Amman. So now, since we are running a little bit late, without further ado, I'm gonna give the floor and move to the next session, which will be the official launch of the second edition of the MedWE Policy Paper by our partner, who will explain more about it. She will be in good company with two amazing speakers and contributors of the MedWE Policy Paper second edition. So now I give the floor to Gemma Obarel. She is Director of Culture, Gender and Civil Society at the European Institute of the Mediterranean. Please, Gemma, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Julia. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for this important introduction to what is our objective today, when the teams of Union for the Mediterranean and IEMed, we start to work together to launch this idea of MedWE papers. We were thinking always to which topics we can address that can be key challenge for gender perspective in the region. So we choose economic for the first one, and the second one, after thinking and thinking, but not a lot of thinking, because we know the reality and the context around us. We see a context plenty of crises. We see a context plenty of possibilities for our gender perspective be there in our language, in our concepts, in our way to proceed. So with Ana Dorandikia, with Julia, with Mariona Rico, with the teams, we were thinking and working and speaking with a lot of you today participating in this to address which issue can be interesting to open. This is just a starting point of a nexus that we consider completely strategic from the point of view of the Euro-Mediterranean policies in the region. This is climate change, security, and gender. Wow, 3 main topics together. And this, that should be a natural way to proceed, to access, to work, it's lacking of methodology, is lacking of spaces, is lacking, the more important for us, is lacking of knowledge and impact in the policies. So we address all these issues from perspective that as a starting point wants to tackle a little bit a lot of perspectives. So here you can see this paper that is available from today and that you can also consult, and it's open access, and that can provide you an in-depth about different perspectives. A lot of importance provided to the South perspective in this first MedWE for this issue. Why? Because we consider that this, from this, if I may say, geographically also bottom-up approach that we can start, providing voice to the ones in a more sensitive perspective from our Euro-Mediterranean relations. So you can see here perspective affecting, as has been said, in a very dramatic way in agriculture, in economic dimension, also much more also addressed in the conflict and policy. We will now talking about this, about movements of persons, that it's displacement is one of the main key challenges that we have in the area, but also regarding public opinion and communication and media, that it's also another tool important to be analyzed. So in the conclusions, we address some key challenges for steps to start to build these concrete policies or these concrete strategies on the future. So what is our perspective and why we choose to start this important debate today, according to us, very strategic at that moment in the region? Because we consider that knowledge, practitioners, mainly entrepreneurs, ambassadors underline this, very, very important, associations, civil society at large, community of practices on the ground, need to work together to understand how we can improve what is our main goal with this kind of exercise. Impacting policies, providing reasons, providing knowledge, providing data, providing experience to make possible that not only management, but the definition of plans, national security plans, Euro-Mediterranean Mediterranean plans, whatever can have to do with policies in the region, take seriously the role of gender into account. And we choose climate change being one of the main challenges, and we choose security because it's our context. We should be ready to prevent and to react to a question that is now fundamental.
Gemma, you are muted. Gemma, you are muted. Sorry.
And all what I say, it was been...
No, before we could hear you, but the last minute, yes.
But very strange. Okay.
Now we can hear you well.
I say that we will start, so it's okay. We will start with the first insights to provide a little bit of food for thought for the second part of this debate that will be more insight on the topic. So we choose two perspectives that we consider very relevant for this exercise. As I say, the first perspective that will be provided by Sarine Karejar, that she's Program Director, coming from Lebanon, from the Arab Reform Initiative. She's a very well-known expert on the matter, and she's providing us this very important focus that is what is happening now in this hot space that is Syria and Lebanon, mainly focusing, and this is our question, Shireen, how we can understand what is happening in this region from this practical, if I say practical, from this concrete question and problematic, why we should take care of the question of displacement, gender, and security issues. How does it to do with what is happening that it's so relevant in politics? Why this is a key issue at that moment? Shireen, you have the floor.
Thank you, Gemma and Ambassador Julia and Anna for this. And this has been a wonderful experience to be surrounded by wonderful and knowledgeable women from the region. And I'd like also to congratulations to our colleagues who also are contributing to this paper, to this wonderful dossier. So how are we linking climate, regional instability, and gender together? And as we look, yes, and as the previous speakers have mentioned, climate change acts as a stress multiplier, attributing regional instability solely to environmental factors oversimplifies the issue. So if we look in the region, we have persistent governance failures, socioeconomic inequalities, and protracted conflicts. They are the key contributors to the region's instability and fragility. And here, as a reference to Marwa Dawoodi, a Syrian colleague, she emphasized the overlooking at these underlying causes risk creating one-dimensional policy solutions that fail to address the root drivers of instability. And this complex intersection of climate stressors, political unrest, and particularly in the context of the Syrian refugee in Lebanon, which is the paper that I've contributed to this dossier, underscores the urgent need for multi-dimensional strategies. Looking back at the Mediterranean region, where we are all Mare Nostrum, the region's increasing environmental stresses poses a threat to political instability, especially in North Africa and some portions of the Middle East. The region is especially susceptible to stress brought by climate change because of its weak governance systems, high unemployment rates, and reliance on agriculture for economic growth. And you've mentioned it, Gemma. Political instability and social unrest can worsen when governments are unable to control the growing shortages of resources, particularly water and food. For example, the Nile Basin is a major geopolitical hotspot where Egypt, which depends on the Nile for 95% of its agriculture and drinking water, may become tense with Ethiopia and other upstream water users. So these disputes are made more difficult by climate change, which may lead to violent conflict or diplomatic crises over access to essential resources. What do we need? We need stronger institutional structures and governance to protect wealthier Mediterranean countries, as we are seeing today, but we need more protection from the Southern Mediterranean and Southern Europe, which often have inequalities and have political instability. Within this broader context, women face disproportionate challenges. Climate change intensifies existing gender inequalities, particularly in conflict-affected areas where women bear the brunt of displacement. And you mentioned that, Mr. Ambassador. They also face food insecurity and economic precarity. So in both Syria and Lebanon, women are constantly vulnerable communities which experience heightened risks of gender-based violence, reduced access to education and healthcare, and increased responsibility in securing household livelihoods as environmental and political crises unfold. And my paper mentions this, and I hope you will read it. So to focus on three main points: migration trends and climate change and the link of these two. In the Mediterranean region, we've seen migration as in being increasingly influenced by climate change. Populations are constantly being uprooted by desertification, sea level rises, especially in North Africa and the Middle East. 2 to 4 million people may be displaced in Egypt if sea level rose by 0.5 meters, with many of them taking up residence in Cairo, which is already congested cities. and rural populations are driven into cities by factors including food instability, water shortages, and dwindling agricultural options, which may cause overpopulation and strain on the infrastructure and heighten social tensions. So to put a reference to the Women's Refugee Commission, it highlights that Syrian women in refugee setting face constant barriers to accessing healthcare and legal support, further complicating their migration experiences. And as well, the Cairo Review in 2023 emphasizes in response that the intersection of climate change and conflict has deepened gender inequalities, leaving women as the most vulnerable among the displaced population at risk of exploitation and violence. This has been evident in Syrian agricultural collapse. The country, which was Syria, the food basket of the region, has lost over 50% of its agricultural production in the past decade due to war and climate change, which leaves the current government in a very difficult position, leaving now also women farmers, which are the largest employers in the region, and specifically in Syria, to sustain their livelihoods. Water scarcity, desertification, and increased temperature have intensified food insecurity, forcing many into displacement. So in the past climate disasters, male outmigration left women behind as de facto heads of households, burdening them with additional labor and making them susceptible to exploitation. And what we propose here is a need for protection. Climate refugees lack formal legal recognition under the Geneva Convention. International frameworks like the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Global Compact on Refugee acknowledge the intersection of climate-induced migration and gender, but remain non-binding. And most countries prioritize internal displacement over cross-border migration protections, leaving female refugees particularly vulnerable. So without comprehensive policies addressing the climate change, migration, and gender inequality, displaced women will continue to face extreme risks in both their journeys and host communities. And I'll give a specific example of the Syrian workers in Lebanon. And here there are several studies, and I'll reference some of them. One of them focuses on the political and economical factors which leave Syrian refugee, those working in the agricultural workers in Lebanon, more vulnerable, especially when it comes to the pesticide exposure. As we have seen, although Syrian refugees make up a sizable share of Lebanon's agriculture workforce, they are subject to dangerous working conditions with no regulations for occupational health and safety. And several elements have weakened agricultural sustainability, as have military wars and political unrest. And we have seen agricultural workers' health concerns are made worse by growing reliance on pesticides in response to decreasing crop yields. And this need for chemical-intensive agriculture is further fueled by issues with environmental degradation and food insecurity, particularly in Lebanon. So going back to the current situation in Lebanon, though we have a new government and our hopes are quite high, historically, the political and historical background of Lebanon has had a role in the agricultural sector's marginalization. Government support for farming has decreased as a result of economic policies that prioritize urbanization and financial services over agricultural development. And here, Syrian refugees, which are a workforce, have been exploitative situations because they are legally only allowed to engage in construction, agriculture, and rubbish collection. These may leave less legal safeguards and put them into more working hours and paid less compared to other Lebanese counterparts. So with minimal control, the Lebanese government disengagement for agricultural investment has resulted in a greater reliance on pesticides and other markets. And this, again, as I mentioned before, affects their health and their conditions. And here there is a new study by the International Labour Organizations to have more policies towards addressing workers' rights and workers' safety. And another study that I will also look at, and here focusing more on the system where women have been facing, specifically in agriculture sector, that demonstrate how gender inequality, forced migration, and climate change combine to produce new kinds of labor exploitation. And we've seen here, displaced women will experience even more job instability as climate-related stressors rise, making them already in poor circumstances and worse situations. Stronger safeguards against exploitation, gender-sensitive labor laws, and climate adaptation plans that take into account the unique difficulties faced by refugee women are all necessary to address these problems. So the cycle that we're looking today is economic hardship, gender violence, displacements. It will continue to shape the lives of these vulnerable women and workers unless there is a significant intervention. And to look at the conflicts that we're looking in the region, it's true that Syria is no longer in conflict, but it's still, Lebanon is still under war, if we can say. And this continued will have more impact on seasonal labor migration, which has turned, as we have seen in the past decade, into permanent displacement, pushing an unprecedented number of Syrian women from highly rural areas into Lebanon's agricultural employment. In the past, agricultural labor was a short-term source of income, and many workers left Syria at the end of the harvest season. But because displacement, these women no longer have other options for employment. Therefore, working in agriculture is now required than optional. And furthermore, in order to provide for their families, refugee women who had never worked in the past in agriculture prior to the crisis are now forced to do so. Employers have been able to lower wages and increase labor expectations due to the glut of workers brought about by the refugee crisis, which has further exacerbated the economic exploitation of displaced women. And to give us very specific example, and here also a colleague from Lebanon has written about it, Nassar, the shawish system, which is a shawish is a male labor contractor, or what we call it a shawish. It regulates and access to households. So he becomes the patron or the guardian of these women and has access over their houses, their work, their labor, their bodies, to have allow them to work. And this is a crucial component of exploitation. And this exploitation happens because of climate change, because of migration, and because of conflict. So what happens? Because of they have to agree on the conditions. Yes, Gemma.
I'm sorry, Sarin, but
yes.
to conclude, because I'll
conclude very quickly, and maybe as a quick recommendation, I'll give. So addressing these intersecting crises requires a multidimensional approach. We can no longer think of one sector. All the different sectors are interconnected to each other. And it needs stronger labor protection for these women, climate adaptation policies, and legal frameworks that uphold refugee and women's rights. And again, since we're talking in a European context, this is not just to put women, and it forces also displacement, not just intra the region, but also from the south to the north. So therefore, we need to involve and push for more stringent, inclusive policies for women to have not a role just, but also to be protected in their journey into the migration. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarin. I'm sorry very much because we can go into this. We are doing an effort, but in fact, what she say about the multidimensional approach is very interesting and important of this exercise. We need to invest in gender lens, not only in talking about women and indicators about women. This is not enough. We need to take this perspective from knowledge and from this reflection. Thank you, Sarin. And if we have been talking about vulnerability and with this example of what is happening in the region in a very, as we say, hotspot area, we are now taking another perspective that we consider is essential. It has been said by Julia, by the ambassador, and in fact, it's a mainstream of all the exercise we are doing. We know how vulnerable and how victimized the women are in this. But because the gender lens, and because this impact we are looking for, we need to understand, as ambassadors pointed in a very correct way, no? In this sense, we need to understand why this is so important, leadership, not only empowerment in this sense, but leading the process of decision about this matter. So we are asking Zeina Monir. Zeina Monir is another of the recognized experts contributing in the paper, and she's climate change and environment program lead in the Plan International in Egypt. and she's speaking from Cairo. It's a key region for this kind of challenges that we are talking about. And we are very much interested to understand why it make it change to make the gender perspective in the making decisions, in the policy, in the politics, and how it's so important starting also by this approach. Zeina, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this opportunity. At the beginning, I would like to thank the Union for the Mediterranean and the European Institute for the Mediterranean for organizing such webinar. It is an important occasion to address critical policy issues such as today's issue of women and in the context of climate change in the MENA region and Southern Mediterranean region. Also, I'm pleased being introduced to such a thriving community of female scholars and practitioners. It is very important to invite those who are most affected by climate change today to speak loudly and also to be fully engaged in addressing policy debates about climate change. In addition, also women possess invaluable first-hand experience, positioning them as driver of change rather than being mere passive consultees when it comes to climate change issues. So regarding your question about women in the context of climate change in the MENA region, in my policy brief, actually, I propose that women needs to go beyond the vulnerability discourse, and that it has become like a common wisdom that women bear the brunt of climate change, and climate change work it as a threat multiplier, highlighting existing gender inequalities and further worsening them. However, this only part of the story, because usually women are perceived, as I mentioned, as passive consultees or like helpless victim or fortunate like survivor of climate change. However, it's not the complete story. It overlooks the complicated realities of power dynamics and like the multi-dimensional aspects of vulnerability. I would like to further elaborate on this issue, highlighting that usually this projection of women as helpless victims is related to the perception of women identities as like fixed, centered, and uniform, disregarding other factors that shape women's lived experience of vulnerability, such as age, wealth, class, and ethnic belonging. A recurrent theme actually in the vulnerability research when it conflates feminization of household headship with a marginalized narrative of women poverty. This emphasis on the association of poverty with the feminization of a household headship has also legitimized the discourse of climate vulnerability and the feminization of heads of household. However, this assumption of feminization of vulnerability is refuted actually by numerous studies that indicate the crucial importance of other social factors in the context of female-headed households as a determinants of vulnerability. For example, one study indicates that female househeads who receive remittances from migrant male workers might be less poor than male-headed households, while widows or divorced women might instead be among the poorest of rural people due to sociocultural norms that deprive these women from land ownership and work opportunities, particularly in the MENA region. Actually, the agriculture is a big source for livelihoods, and informal women farmers are working extensively in the agricultural sectors. Other studies refer to the intra-household dynamics and livelihood strategies, as well as the broader socio-economic and political context in which the household is embedded in order to understand gender role in climate change adaptation. For example, the comparison between the migrant sending female-headed households and those without migrants revealed that households with migrants are highly successful in deploying climate adaptive practices such as crop diversification, increased use of fertilizers, using irrigation techniques, hiring labor, free tree plantation around the houses, and so on. This indicates that migration has the potential to reduce the overall vulnerability of women-headed households by increasing their income and enhancing their adaptive capacity and agency to address climate vulnerability. Furthermore, climate disasters and the process of adaptation in rural communities are related with changes in gender roles and livelihoods activities, which in many situations contributes to eliminating women vulnerability. For instance, one study found that women in rural communities managed to move into salaried position, for example, and wage labor after their communities were impacted by climate disasters and the migration of males and adult men to neighboring community pursuing alternative livelihoods activities. Talking about the MENA region, we have plenty of cases where women are not just passively impacted by climate change. However, they prove to be a driving force behind many of the solutions that could mitigate the climate change impacts in the region. For example, I will give you like two main situation where women prove to be agents of change and like driver of a change rather than being helpless victims. For example, in Morocco, due to accelerating drought impacts and the decline of fertile lands in central and southern region of Morocco, home to many Amazigh community, men migrated to urban areas in pursuit for better livelihood conditions, leaving their wives at the heads of the household. The Amazigh women managed to play a key role in managing the natural resources and adopting various climate adaptation practices such as diversifying their crops, selecting pastures that are resistant to droughts, maintaining healthy plants through hand weeding, grafting and other techniques, preserving seeds and dried fruits, and selling food crops in the market. By this way, Amazigh women managed to secure alternative livelihood sources to their families, ensure food security, and develop their capacities to withstand harsh and erratic weather events. In Palestine, given this like hideous war, like Israeli war in Palestine, we can see that women are impacted by not only like the ramification of the war, but also the climate change impact is aggravate their securitarian situation, compound food insecurity and climate change and water scarcity. However, though all these compounding and multi-dimensional vulnerabilities and threats, women are coming together, forging, in my opinion, a new path of resilience and resistance through, for example, agri-food processing businesses, utilizing sustainable practices and collective effort through women cooperative. There is a village in Palestine called Kabalan. Women managed to develop alternative local food such as sambusak, which is a very common food in the region, taking advantage of the manufacturing experience of local women. Further, actually, women managed to expand their market access, reaching local market across the West Bank, including large cities like Ramallah, Naples, and Jenin. Therefore, it's crucial to stop seeing women as a homogeneous group and to move beyond this simplistic view of gender as a binary variable and instead explore and reflect on the intersectional identities that women have. To better understand the complex realities of women vulnerabilities, it is essential to move beyond this like shortened view of women as helpless, victims, marginalized, powerless. Actually, we need to reflect on the intersectional identities that women hold. With this foundation, women lived experiences of climate change are shaped by their social identities that are fluid, shifting, and mutually constructing, as well as embedded in a historical context of long histories of systematic discrimination and ongoing power dynamics and inequality, privilege and oppression across scales from the micro to the macro, from the micro to the macro. Without relying on intersectional lens to explore women lived experience of climate vulnerability, current debate on climate change vulnerability run the risk of being reduced to a mere competition to elicit the most oppressed, the most marginalized, the weakest, the most powerless. It's a famous, well-known term in literature review called Oppression Olympics. Actually, Operation Olympics is a pejorative term for a type of victim mentality that views marginalization and oppression, and in our case, vulnerability to climate change, as a competition to define the relative weight of the overall oppression of the individuals or groups, often by comparing race, gender, socioeconomic status, or disabilities in order to define who is the worst off and most oppressed, in our case, the most vulnerable to climate change. Such contests of oppression, and in this case, it's contests of vulnerability, actually are associated with the foundational, as I mentioned, yet flawed belief that reform and transformation require economic resources. For example, in our case, will be like the climate change finance, and such kind of resources are usually scarce and must be allocated and distributed to the most vulnerable one, to the weakest group, and so on. This discussion actually strengthens the victimhood of women and deflect the attention to women agency across social groups and classes, often discounting women capacities and practices adopted in their everyday struggle, not only for climate justice, but like other types of justice. Furthermore,
I'm sorry, Zeina. I'm sorry to be the one that need to cut, but we need to finish with a final reflection.
okay,
because
the
it's
final
super
sentence,
interesting, but we need to give the
the
floor.
final sentence, I would like to assure that such kind of discourses about women vulnerability and victimhood, pitting women as the most vulnerable group against other group, which not only breed bitterness, but also result in ill-informed policy reforms that merely address the symptoms of injustices instead of rooting out overlapping forms of discriminatory, which are the causes of climate injustices and other types of injustice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zeina, and thank you, the both of you, Zarin, Zeina, because I think we provide a very clear idea how in deep and how interesting insights we have in this paper, and mainly because we are so interesting, and we take this point about your reflection, not only with this new point of intersectionality, but we want all of us to go to this new path with women, with gender, will take the opportunity to lead interesting initiatives, how plenty of ideas and initiatives we have, and not only in terms of practice, but only in terms of knowledge. And when I was listening to both of you, we think that the next step, for sure, will be joining forces from the north part of the Mediterranean, that we are a little bit sometimes far away of some of your reflections, and we need to reach together on this. So for this debate, we give the floor now. I come back to Julia for open let me say, the new debate according to what has been said till now. And we think and we consider that you can use this policy paper as we say at the beginning, as a first step for this magnificent and journey that we head ahead on this new phase of the program. Thank you very much, Julia.
For sure it is, Gemma, for sure. Thank you very much, Gemma, Sarin, and Zeina, for this insightful fourth roundtable. We will move towards the last roundtable of today's webinar, when we will discuss key points on how to raise awareness and encourage a multi-stakeholder approach in line with what Sarin was saying about the multidimensional approach on key topics for today, which are how to include the gender dimension in climate adaptation and promote women leadership in sustainable peace building processes and in climate risk adaptation. and the outstanding group of speakers from different background and diverse perspective will be guided by the moderator of this session, who is Anna Dorangricchia, the project manager of the Social and Civil Affairs Division at the UfM, with a question that they will be answering to, sharing their insights. And then there will be also a debate among them that will be guided by Anna. As I said before, you are very welcome to write in the chat any question that you might have. In English and French, it would be better, but we have Selma, luckily in our team, that also currently speak Arabic. So if you need to write in Arabic, we can tackle the questions as well. So I stop here and I give the floor to you, Anna. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia, and thank you to Gemma, Sarine, and Zaina. I was taking a lot of notes also because it's a good way to bridge with the discussion of our speakers today. We are a little bit late, so I'm going to introduce each of them, asking to focus on a different perspective coming from different organizational and experience. But the two topics that were mentioning in the previous intervention, meaning the multidimensional approach, going from linking climate risk, water, food security, energy security, social conflict, migration, displacement, all of them will be also somehow tackled in our discussion. And only two main points that I would like to highlight. When we were outlining this webinar, our main concern was related to, let's say, two elements that, in our opinion, should be linked. One is that national policies on environment and climate adaptation and mitigation, what we call the national determined contribution. And from the other side is about the National Action Plan for implementing the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. What we have realized somehow was the fact that from one side, in the National Determined Contribution, the gender dimension was not tackled enough. In a very few cases, you have indicators, you have plan, you have objectives related to women's rights. And from the other side, in those national action plans of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, you don't have enough attention to climate risk. So today's debate is to discuss and identify how this nexus can be better embedded in all these two, let's say, pillars. So I would like to ask our speakers also to give their view on these challenges based, as I said, on their experience. And I'm starting from an international organization working in the region, and because they have been doing a lot of women empowerment, but also on climate and on women, peace and security agenda. I'm pleased to introduce you Rania Tarazi. She's a gender team leader at UNDP. And she has been working for several organizations from Oxfam, from GZ, United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and Empowerment, and many others. Rania, thank you for being with us today. And building on UNDP analysis of the nexus of gender, climate, and displacement, and the work that you have been carrying out to support women's roles in peace building and recovery, what concrete measure can be implemented to integrate a gender-responsive approach in this type of crisis, and how can we assure that women leadership is prioritized? Zaina was mentioning the feminization of vulnerability, which is indeed what is happening in the last decade. So how in our region, which is facing compounding crisis of climate change and conflict, how this element can be supported? The floor is yours. Thank you, Rania.
Thank you so much, Anna. And I would also like to thank the organizers for having me here and having me here on this wonderful panel to discuss this important topic, which is also like looking at the nexus is also a priority for UNDP. And we have concluded a study related to gender, climate change, and displacement. Some of the findings also correspond to what has been already mentioned by several of the speakers. I think, like, just to start, I would like to highlight again, like, the connections of climate change as a driver of displacement and conflict, climate change as a multiplier of the negative implication of conflict. And I'm emphasizing conflict because many of the countries in this region are in states of conflict or conflict-affected countries. And we also know that climate change impacts disadvantaged groups a little bit more disproportionately. So climate change creates higher exposure to risk and conflict. And in conflict settings, people and women in particular have lower adaptability to the insecurity context at all levels, which exacerbates disadvantages. I completely agree with Zaina in terms of women are not one group. We need to recognize the inequalities among them. The negative implications are usually associated with the implications of harsh levels of destruction in context of climate and conflict that lead to natural and physical infrastructure, loss of livelihoods, access to services, finance, and markets, combined with the effect of the historic discrimination that women face. And this is, I think, the justification for mentioning the increased vulnerability and exposure of women to contexts of climate change as well as conflict. And we know, as mentioned earlier, that women are excluded from decision-making processes to a great extent and impacting policy and not really as present as they should be in the policy spaces. I think that also maybe we need to define a little bit security, and here I think we can refer to how the UN in this report on gender, climate, and security in 2020 has defined security to be broader than national security, but to occur at different levels: household, community, national, and also interstate, but also the different dimensions of what we call human security, which look at the economic, food, health, community, environmental, personal, and political spheres. And here the concrete actions that I also emphasize the issue and necessity of policy harmonization, which has been discussed already, and in terms of linking the climate policies to the Women, Peace and Security agenda, but also integration of the gender dynamics into climate policies. We see that the conversation has started more on the link between climate policies and security in general, but the gender dynamics are not yet sufficiently neither understood nor systematically integrated into these policies. So we do completely support what has been said about the need to include the climate risks in the Women, Peace and Security agenda, and according to the UN Secretary General's report, this has started already. In some cases, we see such examples, but I think even more importantly, integrating the gender dynamics and the Women, Peace and Security agenda into the climate policies, especially in connection to the possibility of these policies being better financed. And as we know, usually our gender equality strategies and women, peace and security agendas are developed without the right mechanisms or financing to enable implementation. And for this, what is necessary is also, again, I stress what is mentioned before, research and analysis. We need to go beyond the assumptions and really look at the implications of climate change on women. Are they really vulnerable? Where are they vulnerable if they are? To really look at evidence and not base our policies on assumptions. So a systematic approach to conflict, gender, and climate analysis to better understand the gender-specific risks and to be able to respond comprehensively and not in a lopsided manner where the gender lens is not present. In connection to this, and based on our experience, as we support nationally determined contributions development process with countries, UNDP, through its Climate Promise Initiative, recommends an institutional coordination process for the national women machineries that are entrusted with the 1325 action plans normally in countries are included in the discussions and in the development of nationally determined contributions or other climate policies, such as national climate adaptation plans. And we also recommend a consultative process that brings women, youth, and indigenous groups into the climate conversations. And I'll talk a little bit more about the role of women civil society. So that's the first point in terms of policy harmonization. The second point is related to also a point that Zaina has mentioned, to the gender roles and the impact of conflict and climate that has had on the change in gender roles. And we looked at this a little bit in our study of displacement, and we saw that in some cases, women are often pushed, or they are pushed into roles where they become the income earner if they are due to loss of the income provider, due to death, detention, disappearance, or migration, into economic roles, and they become the breadwinner of the family. They are often also in the community doing negotiation at the local level, having a role in building bridges between the different communities, so a role in social cohesion and management of natural resources in connection to social cohesion. We see sometimes that there is a positive shift in social norms as a consequence. And we see sometimes that the social norms are actually maintained and they lead to violence, hate speech against the women who are active. So I think also Sareen mentioned this, I completely support that there is a need to combine the protection with, the activism and the role of participation. These are the pillars of the Women, Peace and Security agenda with protection. When women have these new roles, they are exposed. And the way that we do protection can also be either transformative or like taking away the agency of women. So there are the approaches that we take need to be gender transformative so that we are really empowering women. And we need protection maybe in the short and medium term, but on the long term, we need to be working with strategies to change social norms, tackle unpaid care work, engage with men so that we can leverage this disruptive potential of climate change and conflict and shifting gender roles to trigger lasting social change and reduce risks for women. And the last point that I will mention is the role of grassroots, women civil society organizations, especially at the grassroots level. They are the first responders to crisis and conflict. We've seen this in many cases. We've seen it in Syria, we've seen it in Gaza. They are there, they're responding, they stay, they don't leave. And they have the knowledge and they are able to respond to gender differentiated risks and to gender differentiated needs. So I cannot stress more that we need to support and finance these organizations to be able to do the work that they are trying to do. Help them create platforms, networks, or networking opportunities so that they can collaborate. Help them with the lingo because they know the effects of climate change. They may not have the lingo to advocate. And help them with, again, like generating the data and evidence and analysis that we need, but also psychosocial support in this kind of very harsh context of climate and conflict that we have in our countries. We have worked with women organizations in Syria. We've supported local women networks on multiple fronts. And these women, without our support later on, were critical in Aleppo, for example, in the response to the earthquake. So we see that this is essential, and I think it's very important to connect that grassroots level with the women organizations, because women's organizations are also not one, and there's a need to bring them together across the differences, across the capacities, but to link this level with the national level to influence policy so that the policy is really responding to needs on the ground. And maybe I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rania. I was taking a lot of notes, but I would summarize what you have said on the three pillars that you mentioned, which is more the policy level, the gender roles, and the support to the grassroots organization. And let me just mentioning that this year, the UfM, as mentioned at the beginning by our ambassador board, we want to launch a network at regional level on the Nexus Climate Women Business Security Agenda, we want to provide capacity building for women organizations in terms of skilling them, in terms of advocacy, but to bring them to a table where all the stakeholders, including the policymaker, will be there. And this is why we are going to organize a stakeholder conference on climate, women, peace and security agenda in November, which is also the month of the celebration of the Beijing Declaration. So all what you have mentioned is absolutely relevant for our initiative. And I hope today's discussion will bring, and I'm sure it will, insights for shaping this network and the stakeholder conference. So thank you very much again. And focusing on a very specific perspective, which is the one related to disaster risk reduction, which is a topic which embeds both climate, security, and natural risk, but also related to conflict context. I would like to introduce our next speaker. She is Saira Ahmed. She is a program management office at the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, a regional office for Arab states. She led as technical coordinator the publication Women Leadership in Disaster Risk Reduction in 2022. And she has been working as gender focal point on gender responsive disaster risk reduction. Thank you for being with us, Saira. And we know that UNDRR has been working under the framework of the Sendai framework about a new gender action plan, which is quite a relevant tool because it brings together different dimensions. And about this, I would like to ask you to tell us, in terms of data, Rania was mentioning the need for more specific gender disaggregated data. So which data are available on the impact of disaster on genders? How any statistic that indicates vulnerable groups, more particularly women, based on the Sendai framework indicators, and what trainings or capacity building activities can be provided to women organizations in disaster risk management. Thank you very much. The floor is yours, Saira.
Thank you very much, Anna, and it's a pleasure to be here and congratulations for International Women's Day to everyone who is attending as participating from outside from the world, and the respected panelists, participants, colleagues, and speakers. It's a deep pleasure to be with you and to represent UNDRR Arab States Office. It is a very interesting discussion. I mean, this is a discussion that has been going for so many years, and we want to see that what we have achieved and what is the history and what we have achieved so far. So as you rightly mentioned, the Sendai Gender Action Plan, and was launched on 18th March 2024 in the margins of the 68th session of the Commission of the Status of Women after a very long consultative process to develop the Sendai Gender Action Plan, which more than 65 countries and other 500 non-state stakeholders participated in. And the immediate trigger for development of Sendai Agenda Action Plan in 2023 was the Sendai Framework midterm review process that we did as well as the agreed conclusion of the UN Commission on the Status of Women, which called for the development of a gender action plan for the Sendai Framework. So an analysis of gender and social inclusion country and thematic reports to midterm review process demonstrated good practices and highlighted that governments considered addressing gender inequality as one of the key priorities in disaster risk reduction that required more attention towards by 2030. So it was very much clear in the Gender Action Plan that in regional stakeholder and UN system agencies reports, as well as in the final reports, that the Gender Action Plan is super essential. And the process developing the Gender Action Plan was co-led by UNDRR, UN Women, UNFPA, and intended to use by everyone. It is not for me or for UNDRR or UN Women or UN colleagues. It's for everyone working on disaster risk reduction and or gender inequality in all countries and regions. As with the Sendai framework, implementation by governments at local and national level is a key to success. So close partnership is essential, and women organization, other gender and social inclusion stakeholders are the integral part of the implementation of the gender action plan. The overall goal of the Sendai GAP is to accelerate achievement of the Sendai framework goal outcome guiding principles by substantially increasing resource allocations, activities and impacts of gender responsive disaster risk reduction, and substantially decreasing gender-related disaster risk. Because we see that the action plan has different priority areas, and I'm adamant with the fact that I'm hearing from the speakers on the work they have been doing for a long time, that it is very important to have, as you mentioned on the data side, to increase the availability of sex, age, income, and disability disaggregated data and qualitative information on gender and disaster risk. It becomes more crucial when we have women with disability. And we understand that this created, we need to have a gender analysis to generate and apply disaster risk knowledge in decision making, which is a priority one, understanding disaster risk. As the end of 2023 and before in 2024, we realized that just 68 countries have reported the Sendai framework monitors. It's basically a tool where countries report on the progress in terms of data. And which out of which 62 countries reported on sex disaggregated data for targets like aiming to reduce disaster mortality in affected population. So the idea is that we need to invest greater investment in data collection and reporting capabilities across countries. As well as better data, we need to have a deeper understanding of the root causes of vulnerability and ways in which gender inequality influences exposure to hazards. And for example, gendered work roles have had significant impact on the death and injury rates of men and women in several recent disasters. So when we talk about our region, I think we should not forget the fact that the Arab region is very volatile and fragile in terms of the humanitarian crisis. The humanitarian crisis have affected the countries a lot. And we see the needs of the women in the different roles has been affected. We are all kind of women. They are pregnant women, lactating women. They are single women. They are mothers, and they are single parents. And it's super hard for them in disaster to cope up with these things. Unfortunately, we have been implementing the process for a long time, but we see that data is very scarce, especially the primary data is not there. But we have been improving the process for gender integration in the plans and policies and national DRR strategies, and also the implementation of the work that we are doing under Early Warning for All initiative. Early Warning for All initiative, just to highlight that it's a process where we want to save lives for the prioritized countries and the other countries who needs to have the early warning implementation. And for that, we have developed a disability and gender checklist for early warning system. And we have been continuously doing in 2024, November, I organized this gender and disability responsive DRR workshop for Djibouti, Somalia, and Sudan, which are LDC's countries. And you see, we realize that they have a lot of issues. They need to be prioritized, and the policies and plans are not in place, because the countries are facing a volatile situation. So we are working on developing different policy guidelines for mainstreaming the needs and concerns of vulnerable groups in disasters. And it's a key element to have the early warning roadmaps having the lens of a gender lens, so that the women needs are not neglected. So this is an ongoing process. I think gender is cross-cutting in all the work we are doing, whether it is the DRR, it is a National Adaptation Plan, NDCs, as Rita was mentioning, Rania was mentioning. So there are so many things that are interlinked. We cannot neglect this aspect, but on the other hand, it is important to constantly work towards it and talk about it more and more, because there are countries who are still marginalized, women are still facing issues, and even it becomes more complex when, as I said, in the humanitarian crisis, when violence against women is getting very high. And happy to have any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And I really appreciated that you spotlight the focus on intersectionality, and more particularly on gender and disability. I would be really happy to know more about this yearly warning system, because in September, the UfM is going to publish our regional agenda on disability. And two of the four pillars that we are going developing is one on gender and the other one on emergency needs. So on this, I think we could definitely collaborate more. Thank you very much. And what you were mentioning about the, let's say, new it's not maybe the right wording, but the reason increase humanitarian needs is something that most likely should be also embedded when we talk more about climate adaptation and mitigation strategy, but also women, peace and security agenda. And bridging with the new, with the, other speaker that I'm going to introduce to you is the nexus, more specifically with security and climate in fragile context, in something on which we are focusing a lot when we talk about certain countries of the region. But I would like also to mention the fact that when we talk about the climate risk and the conflict, are not just armed conflict. It can be social conflict. It can be related to poverty system. So what may be from some European countries can be seen and a phenomenon a little bit far from us. We should also take into account that climate crisis has no border and security risk has no border. Food, water, energy, and so on. And this can bring risk of increased social conflict. But going back to the security part, I would like to introduce to you the next speaker, Sara Rabia. She's climate, peace, and security specialist for the Alliance and Biodiversity International at CGR. She is a specialist in the linkage between climate, peace building, gender, and migration in fragile contexts. And she led the implementation of the COP27 presidency initiative called Climate Responding for Sustaining Peace. Thank you for being with us, Sarah. According to a recent report of United Nations, only recently some national action plan of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda are integrating climate consideration, as I was saying at the beginning. As experts on this specific nexus, in your opinion, which are the reasons why this nexus is underestimated when planning the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda? And CGR is more focused on working on one of these dimensions, which is the food security. So how we can bring a more gender-sensitive lens focusing on food security when we talk about Women, Peace and Security Agenda. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Anna, and thank you to the speakers and the participants. It's a pleasure to be here. I will start by perhaps discussing very briefly what the WPS agenda is for those who have not been engaged in the process. So the Women, Peace and Security Agenda is founded on the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, which was launched in the aim of this agenda is to recognize the unique impact of conflicts, of armed conflict on women, and it emphasizes the importance of women's participation in peace processes and conflict resolution. As you said, Anna, it's not just violent conflict. There is a peace continuum and a conflict continuum, and it focuses on the integration of women and the prioritization of the narratives where women are placed front and center in across the entire continuum of active peace and active violence to active peace. There are specific reasons as to why in this region and also generally the Women, Peace and Security Agenda has not developed a climate lens. And I think more broadly, before I delve into the specific reasons, we need to perhaps look at how the in general, the securitization or the nexus between the women agenda and also the climate agenda has developed over time. The agenda of gender, peace and security has developed a lot earlier than climate, peace and security. And this has led to perhaps that gender has been integrated into peace processes, into peacekeeping missions, into peace and stabilization missions on the UN level a lot earlier than climate considerations have been robustly integrated. So there is a gap in the development, there's a gap in the timeline. There are certain reasons as to why, which I will be discussing now, as to why there is a bit of a resistance to integrate climate into these agendas. But overall, when you work with peacekeeping missions or with security missions overall in the United Nations, you could sense that the narrative have like a Christmas tree. So basically, there is a capacity gap, there is a financing gap, and there is a policy gap that we're going to be discussing in detail. But the stakeholders are I'm not going to say frustrated, but they are standing at a point where they don't know how to robustly integrate climate into these conversations. They don't know who's going to fund it, and they don't have the capacity to streamline it and then implement it on the ground. So overall, this is a pattern, or this is a general obstacle that you see when integrating new narratives into very well established, very perhaps older security mechanisms and security frameworks. So when you integrate gender, they face the same issue. The people working on the gender agenda have faced the same issue with integrating a gender into the security agenda. And then we see this happening with the climate agenda as well. Resistance from the security sphere because of these reasons. However, moving specifically to the WPS agendas and why they have not, or they're a bit slower in integrating climate considerations. The first reason that I could perhaps mention is the lack of awareness and understanding. So there may be, in general, insufficient awareness in the region, in the countries that are developing or have developed WPS agendas, on the direct and indirect impacts of climate change on gender and the differentiated experiences and differentiated impacts of climate change on women. This intersectionality of gender and climate change in the context of climate security have often been unrecognized, and traditionally in different policy frameworks, you may not come across the climate security and gender nexus very frequently. I have to say that there are some efforts that have been exerted in the Euro-Mediterranean region to integrate climate change into the WPS agendas. To name a few, Spain's second National Action Plan for WPS acknowledges the impact of climate change on women and emphasizes the need for gender-sensitive approaches. Italy's National Action Plan also mentions the importance of the role of women in environmental governance, particularly. Cyprus, also the National Action Plan of Cyprus, includes climate considerations in the context of environmental issues as well, demonstrating perhaps a more commitment rather than an official framework, but rather a commitment to address the implications of climate change on women. From the other end of the Mediterranean, we have Lebanon. The Lebanese WPS agenda acknowledges the effects of environmental degradation on climate change and women's livelihood and security. And I do have to say that Lebanon has made several strides in including climate change and the gender components altogether in different policy frameworks. And last but not least, also we have Tunisia. Tunisia has begun to address the gender and climate change in their WPS development processes. So these are some examples around the Euro-Mediterranean region where we can see that the WPS agenda has included either an environmental and or a climate component. Not all of them have specifically highlighted climate security. However, there are maybe positive steps taken in that direction. Something else is that, like I was saying earlier, the gendered impacts of climate change have not been thoroughly looked at in the region. We have not made the same efforts vis-a-vis other regions to look at how gendered this conversation is, or what are the differentiated impacts, like I said, on women when it comes to climate security. Vis-a-vis, and this is not only like a developing versus developed or a north versus south conversation, even in other fragile and conflict-affected settings like Africa, African countries or research done in African contexts has been a lot more comprehensive on discussing the gendered impacts of climate security vis-a-vis this region. And maybe this has made the bottom-up approach or the bottom-up processes of translating science and data into policies falling behind in the region. this is also specifically looking at food insecurity, looking at displacement, looking at violence. So the specific angles and breaking down the climate security agenda into like irregular migration / displacement, food and water insecurity, etc. There are a lot of work, or there's a lot of work that can be done on that agenda in the region that has still not been developed. Third reason, perhaps, is the fragmentation of policy frameworks overall. So the policy frameworks tend to be developed in silos, and they tend to be they tend to have a lack of cohesive approaches overall. And this is a pattern, and this is a trend that you could spot within different policy frameworks, not just the climate security or the WPS policy frameworks. There are, like I said, efforts to mend that gap, and there are efforts to maybe work on these silos. But overall, you can see that in many situations, information, data, and operations are isolated or compartmentalized, we can say, in distinct patterns. They're non-communicating. The different stakeholders are non-communicating with each other, or the different units within the same even policy framework are not communicating together. And we can say this stovepiping basically can prevent the integrated strategies from developing, especially when it comes to addressing the WPS and the climate security agenda. And last but not least, like I said, the resource allocation. Resources may be disproportionately allocated. In our region, you can see the majority of the resources are kind of clustered into one end of the conflict continuum, where they are kind of operationalized to prevent conflict, to stop active conflict, or to stop active violence. This kind of leaves less funding and support for gender-sensitive approaches or climate adaptation strategies to kind of integrate and to address the underlying issues overall. I want to move on to the second part of the question, which is the role of regional organizations like CGIAR.
Can I ask you just to be brief for the second part, because we are already late. It's very interesting, and we can back to this, but I would like to also leave the floor for some comments from the other speakers.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So overall, I'll discuss very briefly what organizations like the CGIAR, the MENA Hub, of course, the Climate Security MENA Hub here based in Cairo, of course, and CGIAR as a whole, and other organizations working on the Nexus could prioritize or do. And maybe I could start with research and data collection. So CGIAR can or does conduct very interesting research that perhaps I could share with the speakers later on the links between gender and climate and food. You mentioned particularly, and producing that data kind of demonstrates the importance of including gender perspectives into climate and security discourses. Capacity building is also very important. CGIAR, our MENA Hub, is currently working on developing a capacity building product, a capacity building training that targets particularly climate security, but also includes and prioritizes and streamlines gender component and gender considerations. So as Anna, you were mentioning, you're also working on capacity building. So this is a great opportunity to synergize and link common efforts between different organizations. Of course, on the policy end, we can prioritize, and CGIAR prioritizes promoting gender-sensitive policies. So advocating the intersection between gender considerations into agriculture and climate policies. Looking at social cohesion and building better social cohesion through climate resilient agriculture. And of course, as I said, collaboration amongst partners and community engagement is a priority that we could streamline across different interventions. This is it for now, and thank you, Anna, and thank you to the speakers.
Thank you very much. Sorry to ask you to be brief, because it was really interesting. There will be a lot of space of collaboration, I'm sure, with CGIAR, but just to summarize the element that you highlight in your intervention, I think the lack of awareness and knowledge, the need for more data, the need for breaking the silos when you work on this nexus, and the need to increase the capacities. I think these are some of the takeaways that I will let's say that I have noted, but one thing that you mentioned, which about this dimension of security, which for CGIAR is specifically related to food and agriculture system, will bring us to the next intervention, which will be focused on a specific topic, which is the one on water security. And I'm very, very pleased to introduce the next speaker, Ms. Dr. Antti Bruma. She is Deputy Regional Director at the Global Water Partnership Med. She leads the Global Water Partnership Med work in the MENA region since 2019. She is a political scientist by education and specializes on global development issues and water policy. Thank you very much, Antti, for being with us today. Now, I know because we have been working on this since 2021 now, on this together. You have been working on the challenge of water scarcity, which is a major risk in our region. And you have been working more specifically on women's roles in water diplomacy in context of conflicts. How do you think women leadership in water governance can contribute to the regional security? And if you can share with us a couple of examples of women-led initiatives in this context, and how the regional cooperation that you are leading in this topic can bring more security in the region. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Anna. It is a great pleasure that I join you today. My special thanks to the Union for the Mediterranean, the Division for Social and Civil Affairs, and the European Institute of the Mediterranean, the esteemed colleagues and all the participants for this wonderful opportunity to celebrate together this year's International Women's Day. As Anna said, I represent UfM-IEMed. This is one of the 13 regional branches of a global action network and we work for a water-secure world. At the Mediterranean, our passion, our focus is, of course, this region, this beautiful, this refined and resilient mosaic of peoples and with deep roots, ethnic and historical backgrounds, memories, everything imprinted in our own DNA. This mosaic of civilizations, religions, ideologies, philosophies. But despite the changes and the centuries-old outline patterns still remain surprisingly visible and present. And the strong patriarchal society and the culture that bluntly discriminates between male and female in our region are among such prevailing patterns. At the same time, and as several of the other speakers mentioned, our region is endangered in many ways. Not least because it is one of the most affected areas from the impacts of climate change, warming at a pace of 20% faster than the global average, and being the second most affected region after Africa, suffering from desertification. And of course, let us not forget that our region is also the hotspot of delicate and fragile geopolitical and socioeconomic conditions. And regional peace and stability, although much longed for, still remains out of reach. This delicate intersection of challenges impacts the availability of and access to water resources, thus hindering sustainable development. So I would like today to share with you two examples, two areas of works and initiative that can contribute to changing this ominous picture. And we can synergize together and do have a greater impact. So as you said, Anna, sustainable water resources management is a critical and universal challenge of the 21st century that is increasingly linked to insecurity at all scales. So it is really of no surprise that world business and political leaders regularly consider water crisis as a top global risk. This is, as we have seen, depicted in the different editions of the World Economic Forum. But it is only within the past decade that water insecurity has been increasingly recognized as a cause of social and political instability, threatening peace and security. Until now, there has been a large number of research and studies on gender equality at the political and economic levels, yet the role of women in the water sector and in the water diplomacy and international cooperation in particular has not been explicitly studied. In fact, the role of women in this context has been steadily underestimated. And despite the acknowledged essential role of women in peace building, conflict management, and sustaining security, as reaffirmed by the landmark United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 that also Sarah referred to. Current efforts to empower women leadership in water diplomacy often target women in mid to senior management positions in water governance issues, with a long-term objective of achieving positive steps towards peace. At the same time, global, regional, and national challenges related to climate change have been increasingly addressed, and links between climate change and conflict are also gradually recognized. All these efforts are well applauded and assist in narrowing the gap towards meeting Agenda 2030 and beyond. However, in a world of disappointingly increasing armed conflicts, there is a need to understand what water diplomacy entails, specifically for women who need to lead on water supply, access, and sharing in those contexts. Women already encounter obstacles in attaining leadership positions within and beyond the water sector. This is further exacerbated when the conditions within which they operate are those of conflict, whether inter or interstate. In most of the countries that are currently experiencing or have experienced armed conflicts, water resources are mainly of transboundary nature and necessitate arrangements and agreements on shared water use. In addition, these countries are often most impacted by climate change. In the absence of political horizons, the constituencies, including those displaced, will need to negotiate and agree to the use of limited water resources to meet their daily basic needs and create opportunities for dialogue and trust building. Women are at the heart of such efforts, especially in situations in which existing fragile water and sanitation infrastructure is targeted. So when the opportunity came to design together with another 5 passionate women a line of work that addresses these challenges, the challenges to female leadership in the field of water diplomacy and transboundary water cooperation, I had not a shred of hesitation about being part of this process. Allow me to mention these 5 passionate women. Engineer Sharafata Filal, former minister in charge of water of Morocco. Engineer Natasha Karmi, current lead of water advisor at the Geneva Water Hub and former policy advisor on water at the Palestinian Negotiation Support Project. Ms. May El-Sayegh, at that time communication manager in the Lebanese Ministry of Social Affairs. Dr. Tahani Mustafa Silit, at the time head of Central Department for External Cooperation at the Egyptian Ministry of Water Resources and Irrigation. And Ms. Maysoon Zubi, former and the only female Secretary General at the Jordanian Ministry of Water and Irrigation. This collaboration with these amazing women has been based on trust, on shared experiences, and a strong belief in women as agents of change. Let me share that it has also been based on frustration, that with a small number of women in leadership and decision-making positions, and a shared desire to use evidence and hold the continued underestimated role of women. So this is how the initiative to empower women in water diplomacy in the MENA region grew out. This was a collaboration back in 2020 when the Geneva Water Hub and UfM-IEMed came together concerning the elaboration of a comparative study across 5 Arab countries, namely Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Morocco, and Palestine, to do what? A, to identify the similarities and differences in the challenges women decision makers in water diplomacy and transboundary cooperation settings face, and 2, identify the capacity building needs in terms of the various skills of a 21st century water diplomat. The study built upon some previous mapping exercise conducted in 2017 and adopted the same methodology, surveying and interviewing, and collected input from almost 100 women from water-related institutions in the 5 Arab countries. The findings, quite telling. So the obstacles that women face in terms of attaining decision-making positions are mainly threefold: negative stereotypes, a considerable gender pay gap, and social expectations that negatively influence their career choices, including the need for balancing family and professional life, fitting into existing social structures, or simply struggling with lack of self-confidence. Quite interesting, huh? And aware that more often than not, lack of confidence and psychological barriers are what hold talented women back, it is really most important to invest on breaking these self-inflicted limitations and mark a shift towards a gendered-less, ethical and meritocratic cultural paradigm in the region. There is a lot of space for having a feminist diplomacy incorporated into hydrodiplomacy as an existing and preventive form of diplomacy, and research, success stories, and the role of gender models needs to be adequately investigated and shared. Building further on solutions that can contribute to exploring this nexus that we're discussing together today, let me very briefly also share with you about the merits and the potential of the WIFI Nexus framework, yet another nexus. This is the water, energy, food, and ecosystems nexus. Why should we care? Basically, because it adopts a holistic and integrated approach, looking at the bigger picture. And the beauty is that it brings all four sectors on equal footing and tackles simultaneously different issues, paying attention to the element with priority at any given moment. So it reflects on the interdependencies, necessitates collaboration, and really urges to think innovatively and out of the box. So an opportunity to link together not only climate change, but also food security, but also energy security, water security, and of course concern for the environment. Let me highlight a much promising ongoing effort at regional level concerning the establishment of a Mediterranean WIFI Nexus community of practice with which operational synergies could be drawn. This is an initiative supported by the UfM-IEMed project that is funded by the Brima Foundation. And the special niche of this community of practice lies with bringing together scientists, policymakers, and practitioners for co-creating an inclusive, diverse, and participatory platform for collaborative work that expands and amplifies the impact of the WIFI Nexus framework application with emphasis on tangibles, so on specifics, for the benefits of all people and countries across the Mediterranean. Interesting as well is that this practical application is also accompanied by a political process for the elaboration of a strategy for the water, energy, food ecosystems nexus in the Mediterranean, source to sea continuum. And this is a joint effort led by the Union for the Mediterranean, the European Commission, UNEP-MAP, with technical support from UfM-IEMed, the Water Environment Support Program, and Prima. I'm mentioning this because there are so many different elements that we can think of when tackling this interesting nexus. And in fact, in this community of practice, the WIFI Nexus, gender is not adequately integrated into the line of work. So I invite you to check the work, join, and assist with drawing stronger linkages between gender and this framework. Let me wrap up first of all, by saying that I will share on the chat the links both to the work on the work of the initiative on empowering women in water diplomacy and also the Nexus of WIFI community of practice. Also, let me share some great news showing also our commitment to gender equality and the investment on gender transformation for integrated water resources management. Today, actually, we're launching a policy paper together with UNEP EHI and UN Women, identifying 7 powerful enablers for mainstreaming gender in water resources management and prompting action through concrete examples. I invite you also to check it out. And Anna, let me close by saying that moving beyond and eradicating gender stereotypes and biases necessitates really the adoption of a gender transformative approach at all levels of water resources management, with consideration on the way different societies assign particular social, economic, and cultural roles to men and women. And importantly, this requires a paradigm shift and eventually a behavioral and cultural change that takes time. But let us not forget that it has been found with evidence that women in leadership roles and at all levels of management and decision-making provide a strong impulse to the achievement of sustainable development results, including the SDGs and the overall Agenda 2030, as women pay more attention to the environment, social well-being, and inclusive economic growth for present and future generations. Happy to take this, questions. I'm going to share all the information on the chat as well. Thank you for the opportunity again.
Thank you very much, Antti, not only for all the work that you have been carrying out this these years, but also for pushing for more, let's say, proactive commitment from all of us. Happy that you mentioned the community of practice on the WFM Nexus. The UfM is working on a parallel community, and we will work together on gender, environment, and climate change. You have been mentioning the holistic approach. You have been mentioning the need to mobilize resources You have been mentioning the need to change the gender stereotype, to challenge, I would say, the gender stereotypes. And I think a huge role in doing this can be played by the future generations. Now, you know that the European Commission has launched their new Pact for Mediterranean. There is an online survey open until end of March where everybody can bring their suggestion and input. And I would really like that, let's say, the young generation that should be the future, but in this is not the future, it's already the present, can contribute to this. And this is why I'm really happy to have, as the last two speakers of our webinar today, two young, strong women who are in front line, I would say, when women's rights are at the stage in specific contexts affected by climate crisis and context. I would like to give now the floor to Sarah Massaoui. I have to say that Messaoudi, she's regional lead of the MENA Coalition on Youth, Peace and Security. And I have to say that for the first time, I had the pleasure to listen to her last year, almost 1 year ago in April, at the United Nations Security Council. And she was really an inspiration, I have to say. So I'm very glad that you are with us today, a pleasure. Sarah, we know that young women are key agents of change in climate action and peace building. And you have been working on these networks already. But as Antti was saying, there is an issue in terms of underrepresentation of women and especially young women in decision-making when it comes to these two topics. How we can ensure that youth participation in shaping policies on climate and security is ensured, which doesn't mean just checking the list of having young people around the table, but what we can do in terms of real engagement and how the voice of young women in the women and peace security discussion at national, regional, international level can be there and can play an important role. Thank you, Sarah. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna, and greetings to everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Happy to share the space with you today. And to just give a spotlight and a summary, maybe, if there is one key message I come with today, is really to ensure all of our efforts on climate, peace, and security, that they must explicitly recognize the youth meaningful engagement in its correct definition as a core principle, not just as an afterthought. And now we can all attest that we are living in underrepresented times where conflicts have really escalated. In the past years alone, we have seen the highest number of civilian deaths since the World War II. And at the same time, climate change is no longer a distant threat. We all know that we are living it. It's no longer a headline. The MENA region, where I come from, it's one of the most climate vulnerable region, if you want to say. There is water scarcity, declining rainfall, and other. And we cannot doubt that climate and conflict are linked. For instance, if we take the case of the Palestinians, where the water supplies is limited and restricted by occupation, where international law on water allocation are disregarded, turning access to a basic necessity into a weapon of war. And honestly, as young people, there is nothing we feel about the past years that have been normal to any of us. The pain, injustices unfolding in Gaza, Lebanon, Sudan, Syria, across many other countries in the world, tested our resilience in ways we never imagined. And every day we witness these brutal assaults on human dignity and on life itself. And as many of you mentioned, young women and men as well are still on the front lines of so many efforts. Young peace builders, climate activists still hold on to space, and they persisted. We created solidarity spaces. We kept on finding ways to support, to stand strong. Young people today are organized in networks, movements, coalitions. They're not working only as individuals. And they are creating and pushing for a youth-led and a youth-centered and a youth-designed initiatives and carrying everything forward despite all. yet we still feel that our aspirations are not met. How can we change this? Honestly, maybe there is no single right answer to this question. Solution might vary across the different contexts. What matters for me personally is that we remain courageous, we test, we try again, and most importantly, allow room for failure for all of us, so we can raise again and be very fast, and we can push boldly even with the current shifts in climate and security. Otherwise, we will be left behind, and all of these things are happening. While there are many approaches, maybe in solutions, there are few things that I believe in very strongly, and maybe I will share 3 reflections of this, is to move beyond just the word inclusion of young women and youth to really a youth-centered approach. Why? Because youth inclusion can be seen as a top-down approach where those in power are the ones that decide how young people are included. In these spaces, youth are invited usually as participants, not really as partners or as collaborators to design the solution or the change. However, in a youth-centered peace building and climate peace and security efforts, youth are centered in the core. They are part of the whole cycle from design until monitoring and evaluation. And it feels that the solution is not for youth, but it is powered by youth. And here, maybe it's a question for all of us in the room to ask ourselves, are we addressing the real issue by the right approach? Maybe let's stop working for young people, for young women, for young men, and let's start to work with them, not for them. So let's recognize each other mandates, capacities, and limitation, and work really in complementary. The second reflection is maybe resourcing for sustainability. Resourcing and financing stays a whole issue for all of us as different actors. But to really, when we are resourcing and providing funding beyond projects, we are investing in the capacity. And when we invest in the capacity, these youth-led structures will really work on causes that matter for them. And it can be not just financial support, it can be technical support, it can be mentorship, it can be being an enabler, whether you are an INGO, a local organization, a global network, an intergovernmental body, donor agency, UN actor, is maybe that you start to facilitate this connection, to really start playing enabler role, and maybe to reimagine the role of intermediaries. There are many amazing and incredible women-led, youth-led movements for peace, for climate peace and security and all, that bring hundreds or thousands sometimes of people and organizations as part of the movement, and they can be really an incredible actor to support. The third reflection is to build on momentum and break the cycle, and break the cycle of the things that are not really moving forward, and break the silos. And here, this is where I believe personally the women peace and security and the youth peace and security agenda intersect. Unfortunately, we see that both of these agendas are treated in isolations, despite the huge connections that are happening. And I understand that for many actors, it can be overwhelming, that every time there is a new multidimensional approach and a new intersection coming, and the feel and demands that you need to be a convener, advocate, supporter, a donor to all of these structures. However, it is maybe to expand a little bit of how we see the work. Many things are already happening. There is really huge progress. Some efforts are amazing. Some efforts succeeded, others maybe did not. And let's maybe stop reinventing the wheel and finding doors of opportunities. So if you are leading a climate peace and security efforts, let's say, how can we bring youth to the center, not just to the table? Maybe this is a question. How can we expand collaboration, not just within the network, but across the different other movements? How can we think differently beyond our narrow role and narrow mandate sometimes? So there is a huge momentum. This year alone is the 25th anniversary of WPS agenda. This year is also the 10th anniversary of the Youth Peace and Security Agenda. There is a lot of progress at the UN global level. There is policy spaces opening up, discussions, etc. But these spaces will remain fragmented if we don't mobilize, bring others with us, push for this intersection, challenge the silos. And if I would finish with some final remarks, I would say recently we led a research to study youth-led mediation in the Middle East and North Africa region, and the findings can be both inspiring and frustrating. We found that youth excel in track 2 and 3 of mediation. They work in community, they are invited in conferences to be playing different roles. However, they are sidelined from track 1, from the formal peace process. And not only in the policy space, but also academia and research space. For example, we find that while track 1 negotiation are heavily studied, youth-led mediation remains understudied and disconnected even from academic work. And this gap leads decision makers, experts, donors, other institutions undervalue the youth contribution, not just because the impact is not there, but because there is no paying attention to this point. And if I leave you with one question, it's basically, if not now, then when? With everything happening in our region, in the MENA region, how much longer we will ignore the WPS and let's say YPS as well agenda when they matter the most right now? Yes, we can achieve progress gradually without rushing. Every time we can think differently, we can test new things. There are a lot of several political opportunities, but again, I encourage all of you to take a moment to reflect. If there is one thing that you can do to follow up on all of the different recommendations heard today, not just from me, what would this be? And thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. It's always a pleasure listening to you for several reasons. But thank you very much. Also because in your last question, you brought a question that I would like to raise after the last intervention to all the speakers. Meaning we have been speaking today about how to avoid fragmentation, how to have a multi-dimensional and holistic approach, how to empower both men and women, young generation, how to work together to, from one side, avoid duplication, how to make resource mobilization. I think all of us share the same concern. Now it's how to operationalize this. This is the most challenging part. But I will ask to everybody to react to this question. But before it, thank you very much again, Sarah. And sorry, what you were saying about the concept that when we talk about youth, young women inclusion in the process, often is a top-down approach. You are right. I think that more than inclusive, because it's someone giving you the permission to come in, I think we should think about co-ownership, co-design, co-implementation, and co-monitoring. This is where, but this just to avoid the tokenism exercise. Okay, I have two young people around the table. The idea is to bring their needs. But again, if we have a problem with gender disaggregated data, often we don't even know the age of the people where we are talking. And the young generation, mean very young, it's playing an important role. Just to tell you that this topic is so important for us that the next edition of the MedYouth Lab, which is an initiative of capacity building for young people that will take place end of September in Tirana, will have a specific pillar on peace building. So this is something that really we wanted to focus on this year. I know we are late, but the discussion is so interesting. I would like now to give the floor to our last speakers because she's bringing a very specific perspective, meaning working in the MENA region, because she is from Tunisia, but she also representative of an entire continent, which is Africa, where, as some of you were mentioning, there are different experiences and different perspectives in terms of women and youth mobilization around the climate risk, about migration and conflict. Thank you for being with us, Kulut Ben Masur. She's, just to give you a right title, you are, African Union Youth Ambassador of Peace to North Africa. Sorry, I wanted just to spell name, to spell well the title. You have been working in conflict resolution and women, peace and security agenda on the triple nexus of migration, climate change, and peace and security agenda. And as I said, you bring with you the perspective of African Union on this specific topic. Can you share with us what are the experience that you have been gathering from African Union in terms of youth participation in climate security and peace building, and how this cross-regional, so not only among MENA countries or MENA country European Union, but also from the African countries, can enhance the role of young women in tackling the intersection climate conflict and gender. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Anna, for this amazing discussion, and for the esteemed panelists for their very insightful interventions. I was listening and I can see a lot of intersections and a lot of food for thought. So thank you so much for that. I think from Africa to the Mediterranean, the story remains the same. Young people, they are leading the fight for climate justice. They are resolving conflicts over dwindling resources, and they are building peace in fragile communities. However, I think their leadership remains invisible in some of the formal decision-making spaces. And I think here, perhaps with the previous speaker, our perception can be very common because we represent the same constituency, which is of the youth and young women. So the initiatives our young people are praised yet, but they are rarely funded and supported financially. Their voices, yes, are heard, but they are rarely acted upon. So if we are very serious about tackling the intersection of climate change, conflict, and gender, I think we must go beyond the rhetorical inclusion and go into the real institutional transformation. As the outgoing youth ambassador for peace to the African Union, I think I have seen a lot of inspirational youth participation in climate security efforts, and that goes beyond advocacy, of course. I think here it's about structural inclusion in decision-making, in governance and implementation of projects. And one of the most effective lessons from Africa I would be able to share has been the institutionalization of the youth engagement in peace and security frameworks. We have the African Union's Continental Framework on Youth, Peace and Security, which provides a structural mechanism for the integration of young people into national and the regional strategies for peace and stability. Because this framework actually is not just symbolic, it mandates the creation of national YPS coalitions that give young leaders a seat at the table, whether in mediation efforts, in peace building, or else in climate governance. So the structured approach, it offers a valuable addition to the Euro-Mediterranean region, where youth participation in climate security policies remains largely ad hoc. I have seen the ESCOA report on the WPS agenda in the Arab region, which highlights the growing recognition of climate security risks, but also underscores that only one country in North Africa, that is Morocco, has explicitly integrated rural women's resilience to climate change into its national action plan, which is very important because this remains a significant gap in ensuring that young women are not just included in discussions, but they are also empowered with resources, and that's very different. We need them to have leadership roles and policy influence. So we go beyond centralization and move towards a full inclusive processes for all young women. And the experience from Africa shows that this institutionalization of youth and women's participation in climate security governance is not just beneficial, but it's necessary if we're speaking about long-term stability in both regions. So beyond policy frameworks, we must look into the youth-led initiatives as well that happened on the ground and their direct impact on climate security and peace building. Because sometimes we tend to take it slightly, and we do not believe of the measurable impact that these initiatives can actually lead, not only on the short term, but also on the long run. So in the Sahel region, for example, we have an issue of climate-induced resource scarcity that has really fueled a lot of conflicts. And we have seen young people have taken the lead into environmental peace building advocacy. So initiatives, for example, like Green in the Sahel, it focuses on reforestation, sustainable land management, and also some mediation efforts around water disputes. because this region specifically is very, very challenged with water scarcity. So the disputes around this area can be escalating. So initiatives like this can demonstrate that climate action and conflict resolution are deeply intertwined, and shows that when young people, particularly women, who are engaged as local peace builders and environmental ambassadors, they can also prevent conflict before they escalate. So our region, the UfM-IEMed region, can learn from these models. They can invest also into the youth-driven environmental peace-building efforts, particularly in areas where water scarcity, desertification are becoming real sources of socio-political tensions. And similar to Africa Green Wall, which spans 11 countries and addresses both the climate degradation and security threats. So the Euro-Mediterranean region can benefit from the cross-regional cooperation on climate adaptation, and also can collaborate with youth and women at the center. And here the African Union has attempted to address this gap through the Women, Peace and Security Framework, which includes a set of indicators that track states' implementation of gender-sensitive security policies. For example, early warning systems, women's leadership in peace building. But if we get a closer look at these indicators, they reveal some glaring weaknesses still persisting. For example, one of the AU's WPS indicators, they track the number of women in decision-making roles within the peace and security institutions, but does not explicitly include climate governance, which is now a huge portfolio we should be looking at. Another measure measures the integration of gender perspectives into early warning mechanisms, yet does not require states to consider climate-induced security risks as part of these systems. So we tend to, and I think Sarah Rabia, my friend, also referred to this earlier. She spoke about how the WPS agenda is solely focused on gender mainstreaming. However, the climate, peace and security agenda remains far from that. So we need somehow to include both agendas together and put an emphasis or a spotlight on the climate agenda when it comes to the WPS agenda. And I think also, as Sarah Masoudi mentioned, we need an emergency or a convergence between the WPS agenda and the YPS agenda, because it's not enough for us to have separate frameworks for youth and women in peace and security. I think we need integrated mechanisms that recognize how young women as distinct categories in climate security governance. So here we combine the efforts of young people and young women. And at the policy level, cross-regional cooperation should also focus on funding and supporting these young women. We need adaptation initiatives, because now the climate risks are really alerting and we don't have adaptation plans very efficient enough for that, especially for young women. And according to UN Women's WPS reports, we have less than 0.01% of global climate finance that is directly going towards women-led climate, peace and security projects. And this is really a huge gap that needs urgent attention as well. So if we are really serious about empowering young women in addressing these climate security nexus, then we need to speak about resources, and they must match the reality that we are facing today. The Union for the Mediterranean, the African Union, the international partners, I think they must come together perhaps to dedicate funding mechanisms that supports women into these regions, and perhaps in climate governance and resilience building. So I think it should not focus only on areas where we tend to either focus on inclusion or financing, but also knowledge exchange, capacity building. Women need to be aware of the situations that they are confronted with today. Young people, they should be also aware of the challenges that they are confronted with. It's a crucial step towards an establishment of new solutions. And perhaps I can suggest a Mediterranean African Youth Climate Security Network that connects young leaders from Africa, the MENA region, and Europe to share best practices and conduct joint research and advocate for stronger policies. I think the AU here example I could give has already developed indicators for monitoring states' implementation for the WPS agenda, including metrics on women's leadership in peace building, climate security, response mechanisms for gender-based violence in conflict and climate-induced displacement settings. So here the EuroMed region can also inspire or adopt similar indicators to ensure that our policies are not only implemented, but they are also very effectively monitored for their impact. So my question here is no longer whether young women and youth should be included in the climate decision-making rooms. It's whether these institutions are ready to shift their power and allow them to lead or not. So I think the answer to that question will define whether we build climate security architecture that is inclusive and resilient and future-proof, or whether we continue to recycle the same exclusionary patterns that we have failed, that has failed us in the past. I'll stop here, and of course, I will welcome all the questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Khulud. And I'm really happy that we are going to close today's webinar, not right now, but in a few minutes, by this, I would say, positive and constructive criticism, which means that the young generation, in my opinion, bring us a new perspective, because maybe we are so focused on analyzing the challenges, and we need to focus more on co-creating solution. And I was listening your proposal, Khulud, about creating a climate security network involving MENA region, European side, and African actors. And I would really like that the UfM could play a role in this. And the idea of launching this network this year is exactly going in this sense. Is a first step. Because it's a new initiative, and we are planning to have a 3 years program to build this. But I would really like to rely on your contribution in this sense, but from all the organizations that are with us today, to bring the different perspective. I agree that funding is a key issue, absolutely right, in terms of climate finance. I agree with the fact that working in these silos, youth peace and security, climate peace and security, is not very effective. And I agree on the fact that when you talk about inclusion and resilience, we should rethink also the wording in this sense. Thank you very much for your comment. As we are late, I would like to raise a common question to all the speakers, also to Zeina and Serene. And I will ask you to, all of us, switch on your video. So we will be all at the same table, because I really would like to ask you, as the UfM is willing to commit in this facilitating role to bring together, let's say, financial actors, policy actors, civil society organization, academia, think tanks, I would like to have from you one element that, in your opinion, should be included in this initiative. What should be at least one key, let's say, objective of a regional network working on, let's say, women, youth, climate, peace, and security agenda? I will start because I'm starting just from the people that I see from my left to my right, which is absolutely random. Antti, I would like to ask you your opinion. Just 1 minute.
1 minute, even less than that. This is a very important process. If it happens, if and when it happens, not if, when it happens, there are, so many different elements that we need to consider. One of which has to also do with tangibles, like having an initiative that not only does the talking, but also does some of the acting. And this is not only about providing financing, and this is something that was raised also in the chat, but also about facilitating, the meet and greet process for the different participants of this initiative, of this network. So a key element on tangibles, and how to finance joint activities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, I saw there was also some comment on the chat how to overcome this challenge. This is well noted. Thank you very much, Antti. I'm looking forward to our cooperation on several areas, not only on peace and security. Khulud, you already mentioned, but maybe you can summarize in one single sentence or one recommendation, better say. You have to unmute yourself. Sorry, Khulud.
Thank you so much for that. I think one key outcome or recommendations I would suggest for this webinar is to make sure that we revise our existing frameworks, what we have already, and instead of duplicating the efforts or creating new perhaps goals and targets, we should monitor the existing ones. And by that, by monitoring, we measure the impact, we measure the inclusiveness, and how comprehensive of the reality these frameworks and policies are. And this can give us a solid basis to start from in facing the cascading climate risks and the gender aspect of them.
Thank you very much. And I really appreciate that you stress this because one of the first activities that we are planning inside of the building process of this network is exactly to mapping who is already working in the region. And I see some comment also from the Arab Water Council for Women. Thank you very much for your comment. This is our idea, meaning we know there is this scattered and fragmented number of organizations, networks working on this. We don't want to create another network. We want to give and to offer a space of those network organizations already working to see, because the UfM added value is to work with the policymakers. So we want to bring the voice, the knowledge, the skills and the capacities of these organizations to the policymakers to change the policies and to mobilize funds. This is our overall objective. Thank you, Khulud. Zeina.
Thank you so much. I was very happy listening to the intervention of all the speakers. I learned a lot from you. And to conclude, actually, I got a lot of thoughts, and I would love to have the chance to say all what I learned and all my comments, but due to time shortage, I will just focus on like a key message that we need to rethink the concept of gender mainstreaming. It's not about like adding women or counting women in the room or add and stir approach, which is a technocratic approach. Don't like address the root causes of gender inequality. When we talk about gender mainstreaming, we need to know that women need to have a full and meaningful participation, and talking from having the opportunity to talk from the same stand of power like men, not only like just adding and counting women in the room. In addition to this, I would like to pinpoint that regarding the issue about women and conflict and security in the region, I concluded a study last year about women and peace in the MENA region, and I would like to share with you a main conclusion. I found that in the MENA region, the military expenditure rose in 2023 rose to $2,500 billion. And actually, the MENA region bore the biggest military burden that year. About 4% of the region GDP was put forward military spending, double the global average. On the other side, actually, an interesting statistic that in the UN, only 13% of negotiation, 4% of signatories, and 3% of mediator between 1992 and 2018 were women. Therefore, we can see that the economy in our region is built toward this war rather than peace, and women are perceived as war victims, not as peace negotiators. So it's very important to rethink our perception of women. They are not mere victims. They are not mere like negatively impacted by climate change. However, they have the knowledge, the capacity, and the tools to engage not only in climate change negotiation, but also in peacemaking.
Muted. Thank you very much, Zeina. And as you know, I really like to challenge this concept of feminization of vulnerability. And it's something on which we should maybe talk more when we talk about women, peace and security agenda. Thank you very much. Sarah, the floor is yours.
There are several sides. I think it's
Sorry.
me.
No, sorry, Sarah. Sarah, I was saying Sarah. I'm sorry. My pronunciation. Sarah, can you go?
I think that's me. Oh, sorry. I think, Anna, for me, what matters is also the design of spaces. When you mentioned to bring a space where there are civil society actors, policymakers, donors, it's also the design of these spaces. Honestly, we've been through a lot of such spaces, and we believe they are all designed usually in the traditional way. And usually even those who hold the power, they tend to just exchange informally and maybe for 2 hours and then buy. And now we are open to new facilitation technique. Last time we held a space where we did peace games, where we played the role of policymaker, and we tried to tell each one of us to think differently and to design a solution together. So also about these spaces, think about how to bring a youth perspective in designing them. And also most importantly as well, representation of young women who come from very inaccessible because of the current situation. Last year we've been engaging, we wanted to bring youth from Sudan, from Gaza, who are currently based in Egypt, from Syria. I know that we still face visa restriction even in the region itself. So like actors who are enablers like you, other who have like more access to some actors can help facilitate broader representation in such spaces. Thank you, especially in-person meetings.
Absolutely, and the mobility of visa issue is a challenge that we are trying to deal with when talking with our representative of Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I can tell you it's not easy, not even for us, but we are trying to push on this. And last year for the MedWE Lab, we got to bring 2 people from Gaza, but it was really a negotiation until last minute, I can say, talking about negotiation. It's not easy, but we are committed to this. Absolutely. Thank you very much. Rania.
Thank you very much, Anna, and thanks again for having me on this wonderful panel. And I must say, it's just wonderful to be intimidated by such smart young women. So I think, like, my recommendation in response to your question is maybe how can we think of joint frameworks that bring together this climate, youth, and women. I find it overwhelming because there's a youth, peace, security, and then women, peace, and security. We need to think, like, if we have an intersectional analysis of the issues, then we can have a unified joint framework to respond, and potentially joint implementation mechanisms where the funding can be streamlined. It's easier said than done, but maybe we can think in those regards. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. And as you say, Sarah, I think the co-designing, it's not only for space, but co-designing how to what we need to bring on board. Maybe we cannot do everything, but maybe to have the relevant data input to say, okay, this is what we can operationally do, and let's focus on this on the first phase maybe, and to use, as Rania was saying, this knowledge of so many intersectionalities that we should take into account. Thank you again, Rania. And you know that we will meet soon in Amman, so we will talk more about this. Saira, sorry. Yes.
Thank you. So from my side, again, just want to say congratulations to everyone for International Women's Day. Thank you for UfM. Since you will be having this a next upcoming event organized by UfM, and you talked about the early warning system, and because, you know, so many points, everyone, as Rania mentioned, on the inclusive partnership approach and the cross-cutting issues are there. So I think there should be as she said, we need to have an alignment and assessment, a thorough assessment of existing gender inequalities, which can reduce the impact of the vulnerability in the countries. And from my side, I think one thing that we can take away, and you can discuss this later, or even to have an end-to-end inclusive and gender-responsive multi-hazard early warning systems, and the anticipatory action for providing social safety nets for women. And that is all well aligned with the efforts we all are doing, but to make sure that women voices are also heard during the process even for for technical implementation of the work we all are doing in our respective domains. So over to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And just to tell you that what we didn't mention today that in my opinion should be included in our discussion, which is not related specific on conflict and climate, but which is relevant in this multidimensional approach, is the social security. Because if women in the region have social security, most likely this means that we have been tackling all the insecurity issues that we have been mentioning today. But this is a further discussion. Thank you very much. Sarina.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. Thank you, everyone. This was wonderful. I would suggest, going back to the social protection, if we are having clear policy mechanisms vis-a-vis social protection, but also understanding the intersectionality. I mean, today we cannot, as we mentioned the last few hours, one topic cannot be, studied on its own, but it's all interconnected. But I will also reiterate, since we are hosted by UfM and IEMed, the Barcelona process. 25 years ago, it started with a dialogue. And I think being in the Mediterranean, we need to look at our European colleagues and partners who somehow have not left us alone, we here in this side of the Mediterranean. So to reiterate and reinforce these existing mechanisms of dialogue, of sharing knowledge, but also on putting justice at the forefront. And I think this will be the role of a lot of women in this region, to reiterate these dialogues, knowledge sharing, capacity building, but also justice at the forefront. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarina. Thank you for mentioning the Barcelona process. We had an initial consultation a couple of weeks ago organized by IEMed and the UfM, and we got a lot of elements focusing on youth and women engagement on this sense. Just for information, as UfM, we proposed to have gender, climate, and peace and security agenda among the priority of the new roadmap of the UfM that will be adopted this year in November for the next 5 years. So this will be one of the focus for sure when we talk about more, let's say, I'm using in a very generic way, Sarah, inclusive Mediterranean region in this sense. Sarah, now up to you, Sarah Rabier, the last one. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna, and thank you to all the speakers. This has been wonderful and very enriching. Very few pointers, perhaps. I think the UfM and the IEMed, you're very well positioned to leverage a policy influence. So that means that I think when there is a network, when there is any type of endeavor, as the one you are mentioning, using and facilitating the fact that you're partnering with so many organizations, that for the member states of the UfM, with the ministries of foreign affairs that you are directly engaged with, the member states that are in the UfM, that would be an extremely beneficial role that you could play, and you're in a very sweet spot to take on that responsibility. Also supporting evidence, science, and research is very important, not only in the development of the research, including women in the development of the research, but also in the evidence development and contextualizing the research findings. These processes tend to be male-dominated in many contexts, or they tend to leave out the contextualization from a gender lens. So making sure that you work with the partners and making sure that this effort, common effort, places at the forefront as well the role of women in data and science, and also in the interpretation of the data and science into policies, into recommendations, into things that are to be presented to the member states that you are directly in touch with. So I'm just stressing on the role of science, on data, and evidence production, and the role of women in that aspect specifically. And thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Absolutely. On this, I think, and this is the perfect bridge to Gemma, who is leading the think tank and the knowledge hub that is supporting the UfM work. Because what we agreed 1 year ago with Gemma was that as UfM, we can bring the voice to the policy level, but we need knowledge, we need content, we need data. And the role of IEMed in this sense has been fundamental. And the publication of the Today We Met policy, I think it's a first step. And we want to work more in the future to see how to gather, but not just gather, how to use this data to drive policies. This is our main challenge. And you were mentioning the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I would like also to mention that our objective is also to work with the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Energy, the Ministry of Water, of Agriculture, which are members of our regional policy platform, because it's where we can bring our voice at the table. So meaning, okay, what you are discussing about national determined contribution, what you are discussing about future foreign policies, women and youth should be there to co-design these policies. It's a challenge. It's not an easy process, but we are committed to this. Gemma.
No worry, I will not speak a lot because I think we say a lot of things. Just I want to stress 3 points that for me are really important for the step forward that we need to start, not because we already start, but to do an effort to deploy during the coming phase. I think the first thing coming to my mind, I know that it's a long process till now and everyone, but it's the idea to be always innovative in our approaches. We are here plenty of concepts in terms of ideas, methodologies. As we say at the initial point, we need not only knowledge in data, but also knowledge in methodologies and approaches, multisectorials, multi-level, I don't know, mainstreaming, gender, what does it mean, security, plenty of lines of new knowledge and methodologies that we need to apply to let me say, from the soft to the hard policies. The hard policies speak in another languages, and we need to be present with our concepts with this young approach that it's really intergenerational, if I may say, really necessary to provide here a point. So I really thank you, the team of the UfM and Julia, because they choose this innovative approach for what it should be, perhaps sometimes a traditional step forward. So we demonstrate today that this is possible because the quality of your research, because the quality of your practices. So we are in a good position. Second issue, we are talking, and Sarina, I think, pointed to something that for us, IEMed and for UfM is our hardcore of business, that is this EuroMed. So we need, and I'm happy that we need more euro in something that Med is already there. Yes, we need to focus in the next steps to provide this space for EuroMed in the sense that EuroMed is lead, why not, by your, not why not, because the paper is from this point, lead by from this South alert and voice, and coming and inviting these North voices also to join us in this. And this is also an innovative approach because of the reality make us to focus in this. Well, of course, this point of EuroMed, it's also you are with us in this. But it's really a new idea. And third point, because plenty of things, but I always think that this, I will say, gender diplomatic approach, it's not only useful for gender or for women. It's useful to have a better quality in our Euro-Mediterranean relations. We are sure that with, I don't know, the concept, we need to find a way also to bring this concept of mainstreaming of lens that we are repeating because we intersectional, multidisciplinary, whatever you want to call. It's not only benefiting women or not only benefiting the situations that you really pointed in a very good way today. We really need this other way to make things happening in our Euromed relations, because you pointed very well, and I think it's Seina, that we are in a momentum where security, and all of you say about this meaning of security, will be for Europe and in the Mediterranean and in Europe, the main concept in the coming time. So we need to be present in order to change, to make this security approach much more useful for benefiting dialogue and what is our proposal of peace building in the region. We need this approach coming from gender and not only for benefiting women, that also, of course, it's the center of our business today, and not focus this, but is in one of the gender or feminist approaches in the global scene demonstrated that this can make changes at a main transversal way. So we are in this complot, I don't know how to say this in English, Anna. We are together because our initiatives in the IEMed and in the UfM, they really count on your quality, on this fantastic work that UfM is doing in networking alliances, knowledge practices, whatever. We count on you to follow, and to all of the people that today we are following us and very actively changing, in making changes that are more, because we are really in a need. If not, this agenda will be, without these gender approaches like we are talking today, this agenda will benefit, of course, everyone, but will not change things in a way. We are convinced of that, and we are very happy that you are actively working on that with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gemma. You are putting me on me a lot of responsibilities, but I'm ready to take it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, really, to all of you. I know that we are late, but the discussion was so interesting. And as I said at the beginning, for us, this webinar was not just to celebrate the International Women's Day, but this to launch a discussion among us and then to open to others to co-design this space, to quote Sarah, that I would like to be really co-owned by everybody. I'm stopping here, and I will leave the floor to the last 30 seconds to Julia to close. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Gemma. Thank you for all the insightful discussion from the speakers. There were many recommendations on co-ownership, mobilizing resources, stakeholder engagement, and all these key messages will be included in a report that will be shared with you afterwards. I know we are late and we didn't have much time to go into the chat to read out loud, but this message that you are sending and the good initiative that you shared will be included in the report as well. So thanks everyone. I want to thank as well Mariona, Selma, Alba from UfM-IEMed, the communication department, Jordi, and from IEMed, and from UfM, Ainoa, Andres, Albert from the technicians and the interpreter. There are infinite list of people to be thanked for working behind the scenes of this webinar. And we want to have you on board. As Anna mentioned, this is not a discussion that will be over here. It doesn't finish, it doesn't end here. We want you to be on board in the upcoming initiatives, such as the Community of Practice on Gender Equality and Climate Change, the Women and Peace and Security capacity building, in order to really shape together the way forward in this important topic. So thank you very much. A lovely weekend to all of you ahead. And Ramadan Kareem for the ones celebrating it. And thank you to all the attendees for being with us until now. Thank you very much.
And let's celebrate us for once. Have a nice weekend.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.